Sounds good.
We should be live now. Everyone, I'm so sorry I'm a few minutes late. Today has been a really rough day for me. I'm also a little bit slow because I haven't had much sleep. My dog's been sick, and I've never seen so much poop in my life. It's it's different, and this is what I imagine having a baby is like, and I haven't had one yet. So I imagine like one dog is like a baby almost. Probably not. But anyway, I'm so excited today to have Dan from HR, Daniel Space here today. He is just an absolute expert when it comes to HR and all the salary compensation stuff that we've been talking about. What's different about him is that most of the time when we're talking about salary compensation, it's always from the candidate side. So it's from our experience in negotiating salaries. But it's a very one-sided conversation oftentimes, and there are very few people out there who are talking about what's happening on the other side that Dan has. So super lucky to be having this conversation. Dan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for your intro. I hope Thor continues to improve. I always thought it was great when you sent me that saying you like I've never dealt with so much poop in my life, and I'm like, and we're both on LinkedIn, so like that's a really high bar to exceed.
Really?
If the poop meter is above what LinkedIn offers. Also, I'm sorry we started a minute late. I did see that people have been holding off on listening to their favorite albums, so I want to make sure we give as best content as possible. But thank you very much for inviting me.
That's funny that you say LinkedIn has much poop because I thought LinkedIn is actually not that bad. It's like way more civil than every other social media platform I can think of.
I mean, yes, civil, sure, but the BS meter is through the roof. I mean, there are so many
Oh yeah.
one-armed candidates that, the dog got the job, the one-armed candidate, hire for skill, all the AI, there's so much nonsense. I
Yeah.
love when people like comment, they're like the hero story. They're like, I gave this person a 10% raise, and then you find 26 posts that all say the exact same thing, and they tag all 26 people like, okay, which one of you gave the person the raise? That's to me
I
what
love
LinkedIn
that.
has turned into.
It's true. There's a lot it's LinkedIn lunatics, Reddit, subreddit. It's like a lot of fun because you just see the patterns after a while. But
So much.
anyway,
I actually thought it'd be great to start how you and I met because I think that was such a great story. Do you remember? Do you remember in detail? It was that night in
yeah,
Paris, 8 p.m. over
yes.
the cafe.
It was yeah, we met in a bar. No, let me try to recount exactly what happened. I wrote something on LinkedIn, which is a carousel post about how to negotiate your salary, how to have the first conversation. And one of the toughest questions that most people face is, what are your salary expectations? And
Yeah.
what I said was, you shouldn't give it. You should just ask, turn the question around and say, I haven't really thought about it, or, I don't really have one, but, do you have a budget for it? And you specifically caught on to the word budget because that is true, not the correct usage. And there was a lot of back and forth as well because I realized that we're both very confrontational individuals.
Yes.
And I love that because I'm just like, wait, you're mansplaining shit to me. How dare you? And I will say this. We're going to get into details in a bit, but I want to definitely say that you are one of the very few people who were able to convince me to really change my way of thinking around salary negotiation, or at least how to answer that question, because I do see the validity of your point. And you know what? Why don't you talk a bit about that as well? Because you definitely have a much better understanding of how the other side thinks about the question of what are your salary expectations. And that's like the first question that everybody gets asked in the interview process.
Yeah, sure. And I think before I get into that, I just wanted to call you out as I thought that the way you handled it was really, really really putting aside your feelings. I am someone who has a reputation for challenging people. I get blocked daily by career coaches and job search strategists and LinkedIn gurus and compensation coaches because when I respond to their content, I say, you're giving misinformation, you're wrong. Their response is, well, I have thousands of clients. You're just on the side of HR. Let me just block you. So the idea that you and I first exchange each other and then you DM me private and you're like, you have 1 minute to convince me. How was I wrong? And then when I explained it and you were like, actually, okay, that makes sense. And then you took the
Yeah.
information I had and you were like, all right, I understand what he's saying now. So let me so your priority was to your audience and not to yourself. And that made me respect you a great deal because there's so many people that are like, no, this is just about my ego and whatnot. All right, so now that we've done kissing each other's asses, let's give your audience what they want. So I think the idea of when you get asked what are your salary expectations, it places a great deal of unfairness on the candidate because they're like, well, how the hell do I know? Because every company has its own compensation philosophy and they can pay differently. So the one positive side that I can sort of help reinforce to candidates is the one win that you have and that we have as candidates is that no matter what you say, the company is still bound by its own internal compensation philosophy, and it can't violate that. So as a perfect example, if the recruiter were to ask you, what are your salary expectations? You make 60,000 now, and you're like, I don't know, 85. And if their range is 120 to 160, they're not going to pay you 85. They're going to pay you between 120 to 160 because they are bound by their internal policy because of all the financial laws that govern salary, finance, and consistency. So that at least is one point in your favor that I think can help you feel a little bit more confident as you answer this question, that they're not going to be like, oh, all you want's 85? Yeah, sure, because that's just going to introduce a liability.
So you did mention that let's say the internal band for this row is 120 to 160. Wouldn't that put you in the lower end of the band? And of course, as a candidate, you want to be as high or as close to 160 or the maximum as possible, right? So doesn't that in a way kind of hamstring you a little bit? Also, not to mention that early on in the conversation, they haven't really figured out your level yet. So you could be between 120 to 160, or you could be more senior and make, say, 140 to 180, right? So doesn't this in a way kind of peg you at a lower level?
No. And here's why. And then here's a formula that I want everyone to be aware of, because this will, I think, just feel a lot more informed. So the behind the scenes of when we open up a position. So let's just say for ease's sake, this is a product manager. We're opening up a product manager. It's in Seattle for a health med device, 1,000 employees or so, Series D. And what we do is we first justify the head of product will justify to HR and finance, I need this product manager role. So we already assigned a level to it. And so that level already has a salary band attached to it. So let's say it's like a level 9, which would be like a high performing individual contributor. That already comes with, let's say, 100 to 180 as the full range, but 120 to 160 is what we would call the target range. That means that's where most people are going to be based on their level of impact, the scope, the responsibility, the skills that they bring. What we use internally is a code called comp ratio. And this is the most important term I want everyone to know and to everyone to realize, because this will really impact how you think about compensation and arm you with a really powerful number if your company provides it. So when we look at a range, there's certain milestones on the range. There's the absolute minimum, which we're never going to pay, the absolute maximum we're never going to pay, and then we have the target, which is usually between 40 to 50,000. And we use something called comp ratio, which is what your salary is divided by what we would consider true mastery, or the MP. So if we give a range of 120 to 160, it's possible that the MP is 160, but it could be possible the MP is 150 and 160 is just for someone that's a little bit above the range. And most companies are always going to want everyone to be between 0.8 to 1.2, which is the salary divided by the MP, or the mode point. So once you understand that
Mode
calculation,
point, that's what it stands for.
Yeah.
Sorry, why is it MP? Why is it not TM? True mastery.
Mastery point. Yep. Some companies call it midpoint, which is really, really confusing, because then you're like, what? I'm only paid at the midpoint of the range. But it's essentially considered mastery point, this is where the company has decided that true mastery of that salary looks like. So if you take your salary and divide it by that gives you a comp ratio. So if I always use 100,000 as MP because I'm really bad with math. So let's just bring this down to 100,000. If you make 85, then you're at 0.85. If you make 115, you're at 1.15. And then companies do things every year based on your comp ratio. And so if you were to talk to your manager and say, well, I'm upset about my salary, I only make $90,000, that doesn't mean anything. But if you say I'm upset about my salary because I'm at 0.9 of my comp ratio, I've been here 4 years, then that's actually a much more meaningful engagement and conversation.
Okay, so how does this fit into... So you answered the first part of my question, which is you shouldn't worry too much about your leveling yet.
Correct.
Because that's already been decided for you, right?
For the most part, there are a few companies that have a general level, like Google does this a lot, where they're like, we think we know where you are, but when we get closer to final offer, we'll have a better understanding. But most of the times you're already linked to a specific job code that already is pre-leveled.
Okay, so for companies that are hiring broadly across the board, and then after they decide to hire you, they place you into a team and a level. For those companies, would it make sense to not really talk about the target, or does that still apply?
I think the one thing that I want everyone to feel more comfortable with is the idea that this is a business relationship and you're allowed to talk about compensation. And the worst part is it should not be on us as candidates to introduce that, but in some cases we have to be, because in many cases companies are not going to negatively respond to you because they're under the impression this is a business relationship. So they have already come in deciding what the confidence is going to be, but we don't have that. We're terrified. Like this is our dream job. This is how we're going to pay our bills. We don't want to misstep. We don't want to appear greedy. So I just want people to be a lot more confident, especially to their recruiter, as relates to this is a business conversation. I should be allowed to talk about compensation, and I understand you as the company may not reveal anything, but there's certainly a lot of questions you can ask to make this feel a lot less stigmatized.
So there's a lot of fear among candidates because there are certain recruiters who have posted very publicly on LinkedIn about how a candidate lowballed themselves, and they said, you know what, we just gave them $30,000 less because they asked for such a low number, and it's not my business, it's not my job to teach them how to negotiate. So and somebody literally wrote that, and she got rightfully roasted and lambasted on LinkedIn and a bunch of articles, but that does happen, right? So knowing that there are bad actors at times, not that all recruiters are bad, but there are certainly bad actors within the recruiting field, just like there are in, say, design or any other field. Do you need to be cognizant of that in how you act or how you respond, or should you just kind of assume that everyone is playing by the rules and
so I think
move
it's a
forward
great
that
question.
way?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. And I always have to be aware of my privilege because I get to work on both sides. So I can speak with a lot of confidence with what most companies think, but it's not public. It's not public information. And there's like this level of fear. I mean, I get it sometimes as a candidate too. So I think the one thing to consider is that story went viral because it was an exception and because it was everybody's worst fear. But if you saw any of the posts, like for that one post, I would say there were easily 50,000 recruiters that posted saying, I would never in a million years do this, because that's how much in violation they felt. So I think the idea of that being like the worst case example, the idea that you could ask, but that doesn't, so that example should never preclude you of now. So now you know what the worst actor is going to be. And in other words, so the worst actor is going to say, well, it's not my job to train you, but they're not going to say, you know what, I'm going to stop you as a candidate because you're asking dumb questions. And this is what I mean as it relates to recruiters are your best common denominator to express even a little bit of discomfort, because they're the ones who have to close this role. They have no vested interest in trying to screw you over. And in many cases, the hiring manager, the HR business partner, the recruiter all want an excited candidate. So it makes no sense to try to bring the candidate in as low as possible. But the most important thing to me is to just destigmatize some of this fear around talking about salary. And just there's so many great questions to ask throughout the process that I think will help really settle some of that anxiety.
Great. So I'm going to get this out of the way. Quick question. You as an internal recruiter get no additional bonuses or compensation for getting someone in at a lower pay than the initial budget or range allows for, correct?
No, we only get ranges based on how hot people are. No, I'm kidding.
Okay.
So
I'm fucked. I am.
You and me both. No, so the straight face narrowness. So this was something that used to happen to department managers. Department managers actually used to get this. And HR people in the early 2000s were actually the ones saying we should remove any kind of negative incentive bonus plan. So it was never recruiters, was never HR people that got it. The exception is agency recruiters. So external recruiters do get a percentage of a new hire, but they get a percentage based on how high the salary is. So they're going to do everything possible to get as much as possible. So there's absolutely no leverage for someone to lower your salary. And in most cases, when we say no, it's because what you're asking for breaks internal inequity. So like if we bring you in at this rate, we have 4 people that you're going to displace.
Great. So if you were to save $20,000 per year on a candidate as an internal recruiter, there's nothing good that comes out of it for you. It just kind of creates more issues for you later on. Wonderful.
Correct.
So going back to my original second question, which is if you have a level or if you have the range between, say, 140 to 180 for a role, and somebody kind of lowballs themselves, they don't do a good job of figuring out the market rates for this company, and they say my salary expectations are 120, wouldn't that in a way position themselves poorly in the following conversations to get them within the MP of 140 to 180?
No, not at all, because so there's all this misinformation, like everyone who says, oh, just reference that you researched or that you did market data, but the market data that is available to companies is not available to the public. Things like Glassdoor, Levels.fyi, PayScale, salary.com is normally self-reported, and companies have access to purchase much, much, much better data. That, I mean, this is huge and tremendous. So, and through that data, companies can then build their own individual compensation philosophy. So I can give you 10 companies, the exact same revenue size, exact same employee size, exact same city, making the exact same product in the exact same spaces. And you can have 10 very different salary ranges for a product manager because each one of those companies may value that differently. So if you were to say to a company, my minimum is 120 and their absolute minimum is 140, but their general like 0.9 comp ratio is like 160 and the max is 180, there's no vested interest in bringing you at 120 or even 140 because you're just going to be paid too low. And that's a problem that then has to get solved later.
So why even ask that question if everything's locked in already?
It's so dumb. I have no idea. I've honestly have fought against it. And I was consulting with a few companies that started to introduce more of a, hey, you know what? Our salary range is like 130 to 140. Is that all right? And I'm like, can we just do that? Because it's so dumb to like play this weird game back and forth. I think part of the reason, which does make sense, is that it's competitive intelligence. So they don't want to publicly reveal it. They want to make sure that that you have gone first and that they can then confirm versus them just saying, well, we pay 130 to 140 versus you were just like, all right, I'm going to go take this to LinkedIn. And now all of your competitors know this is how much you pay product managers.
Wonderful. This is so informative. I'm learning so much as we go
glad.
along. But
do you want to go to your questions? I see like 100 questions. I want to make sure that they feel
we do,
that they're.
But
You're
I
like,
want to
not
wrap
yet.
up. Not yet. I want to wrap up our original conversation, which is I said we should not say what our expectations are, and you said something different. I want you to say that because I think that is really important here.
Absolutely. So one of the most common interview secret trips that everyone all of a sudden became hiring geniuses in 2020. They took $150 career coach experts. Now they have 3 million followers on LinkedIn and TikTok, and now they're gurus. They have NBC articles. I'm not talking about anyone specifically. But they're like, okay, now that I'm this genius at negotiation, I'm going to tell you what to do. When the recruiter asks what's your salary expectations, don't answer and instead ask what's the budget. That way, now you'll have all the information. That comes with risk. So that was my pushback to you. And the risk is not every recruiter, not every hiring manager, not every company does this. But the idea is you have just potentially done 3 things. One is that you have indicated to the recruiter that you are not forthcoming about your information. That you asked a question by asking a question back. 2 is that you're misusing terminology because budget is not the right word for it, because the budget for your role can be up to 3 times your salary. And 3, and most important, is that what you just indicated is that you don't have self-awareness to realize you have to be paid within a range. And whether or not the recruiter says 80 to 90, 90 to 100, 100 to 110, 100 to 20 to 140, all you're going to do is say that you want the top of the range. And so in that case, I have had candidates be pulled if they ask that or if they reflect that back because the hiring manager does not want to proceed with them. Not all hiring managers do it, of course. And I always tell people this does not mean you can't initiate the conversation first. It's totally fine to say, hey, before we get started, can we just make sure that we're in the same range compensation-wise? It's totally fine. Just don't evade the question.
Got it. So how would you respond if I were to ask you today? And let's say I'm a recruiter who is very, very just very adamant, very stubborn. And I'm not going to give you any numbers until you tell me what your salary expectation is. How should you answer that?
Sure. So the first thing to do is to give a range and to give a large range. I normally say people will always then follow up how much is a large range. It depends on the role. If you're below 100,000, I say give 30,000. If you're between 100 to 200,000, give 50 to 70,000. And if you're above 300,000, you can give up to $100,000 of range. Because what you want to do is just try to cover as much surface area as possible, but make the absolute minimum of the range 20% above the below of what you would accept. So this way you're in like high off territory. If you're in high off territory, you're safe because you can indicate that this is total compensation, which means that it could be the valuation of the salary, the base, the bonus all together. So you're not potentially digging yourself out. I always get a little bit confused when people say if you give too low of a number, they'll move on. If you go too low, they'll lowball you. But no, if you go too high of a number, you'll price yourself out. You want to price yourself out. If your absolute minimum salary is 120 and the company can't do more than 90, it does not make sense for you to continue interviewing. And it's better just to say, I'm sorry, that's just below my range. But to go back to your question, what I always say is give a range, give a large range, but then ask a lot of follow-up questions. How does this fit against the range of the position? Does this company share comp ratios, which is what the percentage is going to be against the mastery point? Asking things like, how does this fit against peers within that team now? How often does this company review salaries? What are the type of markets that it reviews against? What is the compensation philosophy that you can share? anyone that fulfills a diversity in any of the elements of diversity that have typically been marginalized for compensation, people of color, women. I always, especially when you get to offer phase, ask how that compares against the average, because in many cases you have someone like me who double checks that, but there's some companies that don't, and we want to make sure that we look for things like that. But one of the best things that you can do for yourself is just to ask a great deal of questions.
Got it. That's amazing to hear. Is any of this covered in your book?
All of this is covered in my book. Wait, I've got to talk to Christopher Figgett. Can we talk about a comment that just happened now, because it happens every single time I bring it. So Christopher Figgett, when you said every internal recruiter I've asked for a salary range has been very forthcoming with that information. First off, if you asked it initially, great. However, if you ask that as a response to their question, in many cases, you don't know that you have not been given good information. So as a perfect example, let's say that the target range is 1 to 140. If you asked, if you had answered the question, they would say 100 to 140 if you had answered their question. But now if you hadn't and you said, well, what's the range of the position? You're very likely going to get 1 to 110 because you have sent a signal that you're going to negotiate. And so what they want to do is give you the much lower side of the range with the idea that you're going to negotiate so that they can give you a little bit higher. So they're not going to be forthcoming. So anytime someone says, oh, well, anytime it's always worked for me, you don't know it worked for you because you don't actually have the real information.
So you want me to not negotiate, but you're going to negotiate.
It's not that we don't want you to negotiate or that companies don't. It's that it's the expectation that it's going to be. So if your first response that you're showing to the recruiter is, I'm just going to give the high end of the number and I'm going to push for the high end of the number and I know I'm going to push back, the recruiter has a much higher chance of success of lowering the target range because they know that you want that number and they want you to be happy with it. So they're going to be like, okay, so when I offer you the offer at 120, you're probably going to push at 120 and we'll just do it from there. And that way you'll feel happy. Whereas had you just answered the question, it's possible that you could have gone to 130 to 140.
Got it. Let's go through the queue of questions because there are a ton and I've been so selfish.
No, you asked some great questions.
Is comp ratio pretty standard at most companies, or is it more common at companies of a certain type or size?
Great question. It's very, very common. Even if companies don't really even acknowledge that they do it, it's really easy to implement. But usually once a company is at 200 people, it makes sense to start doing comp ratios.
Great. And Ricardo Lamago asks, what if the company has the wrong IE low? If it's low, it's wrong. If it's high, it's correct.
Right? Like according to everyone in the universe, everyone is underpaid and underleveled. So I think that takes a great deal of confidence to say that with such gusto. But what if the company has the wrong IE low compensation level? That if you are legitimately misleveled, like your job title and job profile is like an individual contributor and you manage people, that's a problem internally. But like you don't really have a lot of recourse if you feel differently than the company does about your level. Certainly you can bring up how your job stacks, the responsibilities, the impact, the scope. Like these are all things that we build for job family matrices to make sure that there's consistency. So there's a great deal of science behind it. And HR typically does a really bad job of marketing themselves. So a lot of these things feel like really unfair inconsistencies. But that's a conversation I would definitely have potentially with your HR person, but you have to come in really prepared, understanding why your responsibility and impact scope, which are the three things that we build job families off of, are misleveled.
Got it. We have about 400 viewers right now. I don't know how, but
oh my God,
there's a lot of interest in what you have to say.
No, okay. It's because you're so handsome.
LinkedIn user. Yes, exactly. This is how I make my money. My face.
Hey, I adore you. You are my favorite LinkedIn
user. Oh, thank you. I'm flattered. LinkedIn user asks contracts where they generally just put in whatever number that you say.
Yeah, for
they ask you, right?
And you can't really negotiate with contracts. So like I've built a few different contract models and it's like, all right, we'll pay $50 an hour. Like you can't really negotiate. Yeah. And because in most cases, contractor roles are handled by a third party, they'll do the negotiation for you. But in many cases you have a strict hourly number.
Got it. And then Sam Cuevas asks, second on that contract job question, I've gotten reached out by multiple recruiters for the same contract and both recruiters had different pay rates. It was like $6 per hour difference. Yeah, no, I've seen that so often. I've seen it too.
So it's because the third-party recruiter agency has a different percentage of contract against your offer. So like one might be that they get 20%, one might be that they get 14%. You just get the difference.
I see. So do you recommend them to just go for the highest one, or
absolutely go for the highest one?
Yeah,
and then potentially tell the other company that they give $12 more.
Got it. You know what I'd like to do? I can't say this on screen, but I'll tell you later. Phil Schroeder asked a really great question. What's stopping
Yeah,
this mysterious group of data from becoming publicly shared and truly leveling the field? This
go
is
nuts,
talking
man.
about no. The
Yeah, no,
information you're talking about when it
yeah.
comes to internal data that companies have that candidates do not have.
I
So
think yeah. Please.
yeah, I'm assuming that companies purchase a set of data or compensation data each year from another consultancy that gives them information about what their competitors pay for similar job families.
Yeah, and
And
and,
that
and in
data is
order to get
expensive.
that,
Yeah.
it's very expensive. But in order to give it, you also have to provide your information, and it has to get third party audited, which is how they validate and verify how good this information is. And the
Hmm.
data that companies have, it'll blow your fucking mind. I mean, it is so good. I'm a data geek, so I love it. So what's preventing it from this group of data? Get people to work at like the big firms and do a WikiLeaks and just reveal everything. Go nuts. Like I am more than happy for this to get overrun because it's such an unfair thing that companies have all this access. They pay millions of dollars for these very, very quick licenses. You have to give your information in order to get it. There's like 4 big companies that the
Wait,
entire
wait.
world uses.
Did you say millions?
Oh yeah.
All right, so this is like Glassdoor on crack or something, right? Like
Oh, but
it's
but imagine with like 9 million better data points that are confirmed with like how many companies are participating, the types of companies that are participating, the different levels that the company has. I mean, as someone who loves data, it's my favorite thing to look at is compensation surveys.
all right. So I'm gonna ask you a list of questions, and you feel free to stop me at any point. But
Okay.
let's say Bob would like to be the WikiLeaks
Yeah.
person for this data. How would they go about leaking this?
I wish I could tell you because I don't know the insides and outs of how database IT systems work. I'm assuming that when Gen Z and the next generation comes in, they're going to be geniuses that just crack everything and make everything public. And I'm here for it.
Who has access to this data?
So right now it is only generally it's only compensation people and some HRBPs. If a smaller company, it'll just be like the head of HR, the recruiter, the license, not the recruiter, but the compensation licenses are extraordinarily expensive. So those are the only people that have it. But the thing to know is that even with our access, it is so much drop down menus to get information. Whereas like what I would want is the database because like in order to protect itself, because it knows how good this information is, there's like 17 questions you have to answer so that it can give you very targeted information. Like you can't just ask, give me,
Hmm.
like I saw Ricardo, we can get to your designers in a second. But like if I said, what are all companies that are more than 700 people that have had more than a $1 billion revenue stream, who have built this new product, who have this much split between product engineering, like these are the types of questions. And I can say, how much are you paying all of your designers?
Okay. You mentioned compensation people. I've never seen somebody with a compensation job title at companies I've worked at.
What companies have you worked at?
Bloomberg, Boston
Yeah,
Dynamics,
yeah,
and
Bloomberg. Yeah, so I would go on LinkedIn and do Bloomberg and put in compensation analyst. Those are the compensation. That's usually the
oh,
job title that we use. But there's
I
once
see.
generally once a company crosses about 500 people, it makes sense to not either do it in house or not have an external person do it, not have someone doing 4 or 5 things to it, but rather have dedicated people that have access to this research, provide this information in order to get that research, and then they're the ones that help build the job families.
What stops somebody like me from finding a compensation analyst and say, "Hey, I'll give you $1,000," and you just tell me how much money I should be asking for from these companies I'm interested in?
What makes you think that's not happening now?
I'm an idiot. Why am I?
HR business
Sorry,
partners
skip.
and compensation people are very aware of the information that we have.
All right.
But yeah, so
Is
I will say there's several compensation people that I know at Fangs that sell information in the black market, so to speak.
is this black market? Do you have to pay by like bitcoins or something, or just give me a little
Exactly.
bit more information?
Yep. I've already said too much. No, Bitcoin is the currency there. But you
Oh
have to
my
be
god.
careful because there's a lot of people that know this and pretend to be compensation people. So you have to look at LinkedIn to verify.
I need to get in on this underworld. I'm missing out. All
But I
right.
swear, like you don't have to do it. Like there's like you could actually you can get generally like I've tried like 1,000 different experiments, and you almost normally will get the exact same offer if you ask these types of questions.
Okay. Got it. So it's more just to satisfy morbid curiosity, not to
Yeah,
actually increase my
kind of just
compensation.
looking at
Okay.
the internal cheat codes.
Got it. Okay, so Phil asked another question. Is there much of disparity between privately available data versus self-reported public data on places like blind levels, pay scale? So I guess the question would be, as a candidate, can I trust levels, FYI, blind,
No.
and other? No?
Levels actually you have a little bit more of a confirmation as long as
Sure.
you're in tech. Levels is really great for tech, the same way that RepView is really good for sales. But if you go and read the job descriptions that levels have for other departments, it's embarrassing.
Yeah.
And because their data in is only people who have submitted something that has been documented, you have a verified group, but that verified group is actually really, really small. So you get a little bit of confirmation, but it's still self-reported. Anything that's self-reported is a joke. Glassdoor is one of the absolute worst. Like I used to do compensation classes, and I would show the market. I couldn't show the market data, but I could show the final numbers. And when I would do Glassdoor, they would be anywhere between 28 to 63% off completely because everything is self-reported. I can go to Glassdoor and say I'm a product manager and say I earn $5 million.
Got it. Okay, so not very helpful. In
Correct.
that case,
Directionally, it's fine, but other than that, there's not really a lot of value.
all right, so let's say I'm looking for a job tomorrow as a senior product or lead product designer. I think most of the audience members are product designers, I'm assuming. If anyone's different, let me know in the comments. Where should I be going if I cannot be trusting Levels or Blind or these other resources? Like, how should I do my market research short of just messaging individual designers at companies saying, hey, can you
how much you make,
tell me how much
which
money you're
again is
making?
self-reported
Yeah.
data, so you can't trust it. So I actually do recommend going to Glassdoor, but for directional content. So for
Mhm.
example, if you put in one of the things that I show in the compensation book is if you put Glassdoor and you choose a job title, start changing the job title against industries. And what you're going to start seeing is how much industries, what the valuation is and how it changes. So I think the example I have in my book is social media marketer. In things like personal finance, the social media marketing was paid like 55,000. If it was in telecommunications, it was 65,000. Media and entertainment, it was 83,000. Like, so what it's telling you, 83,000 is not the right salary, but what it's telling you is that industry values that role much higher than these other industries do. So if you want to be a product designer, the first thing to do is to go into Glassdoor and realize they do not have the sophistication of
Mhm.
leveling that most companies do, but you can generally start to get, I say, add 20,000 to below the number and add up to 100,000 above the high number. And that's probably a more realistic range, but start using their drop downs for industries to indicate what industries place a higher value on that role.
Okay, so it sounds like you don't need to know the exact numbers. You just need to know the rough range and the rough direction everything is in. And then you want to give a wider range during the initial conversation and then
Mhm.
follow it up with more precise questions and kind of trust the process and their internal pay equity formulas to make sure that you're paid at a decent level.
So I would say trust the process, but ask a lot of questions. That's really going to be the best thing. What I mentioned, especially in my book, which I think is so important, and I make this free content all the time, is that there's 6 different pillars that impact compensation. The more that you have, the more that we call the golden circle, which is where you've maximized each one. So think of it like 6 Venn diagrams together: job
Sure.
level, job family, industry, type of company, revenue, and then what we call job family to industry alignment. How valuable does that industry and company place on that job, that job family? So the best example of this, the most obvious, are software engineers and FANG. They hit all 6, even without hitting the job level. So in many cases, they may be entry level or senior IC level. These are not even managers or directors, but because they are hitting the other 5, large revenue, companies that produce large revenue, they're in tech, high location in San Francisco or New York City, working for industries that place a high value on that skill set, and the job family itself is a revenue producer. So in that case, those 5 together put you in the golden circle of the highest amount of compensation.
Got it. Where does design sit in
I'm
all
sorry?
these 6 circles? Where does design sit
So
exactly?
you can do the same thing. So for like if
Yeah,
you so design has several different elements. It depends on whether or not we're talking about marketing design, product design, user experience design, human
let's talk
design.
about user experience. So let's
Okay.
be specific. Let's talk about user experience design, product design, and maybe user research. I would say
Okay.
that makes up 80 to 90% of this audience, if not more.
Okay. So you have 3 different job families there. So that's not all design. That would be so product design is under product, user design is under usually user experience, and user research is normally under research.
They're all under they're all sit under product most often times.
Sometimes, so in organizations, but in job families that we have all that access to, they're viewed as different
Okay.
job families. Um,
Interesting.
Yeah. So, which is why, like, anytime someone says something like, "Oh, well, I work in this," I'm like, technically, I know why you think that, but when we do the job mapping, we look at like 10,000 different types of job families and descriptions to map you to the best thing that you do when we do this compensation survey data.
Got it.
So let's say all three were in product. Let's just book them all in product. So the first thing you
Sure.
want to do is find companies that place a high value on product. There's some that don't, some that do. Tech companies off the top of our head do that. Entertainment companies do not. Entertainment companies do not value product. They already have their products. They don't need a lot of product people usually. Car companies are some of the worst. CPG and brands typically has really good product, especially if they're moving towards product tech. For product, you definitely want to move into larger companies because they have so much value placed on that. And in many cases, you're going to get a mixed model of compensation where it's not just base, but then you get things like bonus and equity as part of it. And then you want higher levels. And so you want to make sure, in addition to the level, that you work for a company where product supports to a product function and not like within a tech function, because that's always going to then fall below engineers. The same way we never want HR to report to finance.
Got it. So Steve Domingo asked, please define job family.
Oh
I
yeah, I'm
remember I
sorry.
had the same exact question.
I do that a lot. I'm so sorry because I'm so used to doing this. So essentially, it just describes a group of roles that all fulfill the same purpose. So finance is a job family that has job
Mhm.
disciplines as part of it. So, finance means how a company deals with its money. So then it'll have accounts payable, accounts receivable, audit, treasury, tax. Human resources is a job family. It'll have recruiting, training, HRBP,
Yeah.
HRIS. Product is a job family, but also can be a job discipline because it sort of fulfills two different things. So if the company has a chief product officer and everyone who works on what the company product is reports to them, then product is a job family. It could be a discipline if, let's say, it's a CTO and product is just one arm of it.
Got it. Wonderful. And this question is great too. We've talked a lot about big companies. Do these compensation strategies translate to startups? Let's say with 15 people. How does that work?
Unfortunately, it doesn't. And it's because startups and nonprofits are some of the worst compensation models ever. It's mostly a inconsistent,
Yeah.
pay as little as possible or pay as much as we can for this person. In many cases, they utilize paper money with the hopes that the company gets sold or goes IPO. I've had people join startups and be really successful, but when they ask me what questions to ask during the negotiation, there's nothing I can offer because they don't submit their data. And so we don't have any industry information on them. We have no revenue modeling targeting. There's nothing to say how they do any kind of sales conversion percentages or how much they're offering on equity because they're too small. They're making the decision within a vacuum.
Got it. So let's say I'm a product designer and senior product designer, and I would like to make as much money as possible. So it sounds like I should be targeting certain industries that prioritize product and design. So not entertainment, for example, or not
Correct.
education. Beyond
That's a good one
that,
too.
sorry?
I said that's a good one too. Education, I would avoid.
Uh, Yeah. Okay. So if I were to, so once I land in the right industries, the highest paying industries, what else can I do to really bump up my compensation short of gaining more experience and being a better interviewer, etc.? Like, are there any other areas I should be focused on?
That's such a broad type of question. It depends on
Yeah.
what your goal is. So if the goal is
Yeah.
I don't care what company I work for as long as I'm treated like a human being. I just want to make as much money as possible. I
Well,
would say
let me,
go into FANG or like the purpose now is to go into FANG companies, go into the big four, go into management consulting, or go into anything that the U.S. Department of Defense works with. Those are usually the four types of industries that have the most compensation because of how much revenue they have. Now, if
sure.
you don't work tangentially with any company that any of those four industries would usually look at, the first step is to move towards an adjacency. So, if, for example, I just helped someone get into Netflix because 4 years ago, he wanted to get into Netflix, but he worked at this really, really, really small cable TV access channel. So he had some of the industry, but he was missing both the job family as well as the household name. I told him what he could do. He works in compliance, and compliance is not a sexy field, but it's a very necessary one. So we moved him into an adjacency twice, where he moved into larger and larger entertainment companies. So now Netflix is now he was at Hulu before Netflix. So the thing to do is, if that's your goal, is to start moving towards adjacencies. And you can either do it through job family or through companies. But like it's very rare to go from like a 50-person startup to a FANG. You usually have to get those middle places first to build that higher and higher advantage for household recognition of the company.
I see. So, in a way, you're saying having logos or big names on your resume really matter.
If your goal is finances. So like there's people that absolutely hate working for large companies. They like the thrill of a startup. They like,
Sure.
making sure that you can put in effort and see something. I happen to be of the belief, and I have enough sort of data to correlate, having larger companies on your resume does far more to your worth as it relates to being attracted to other companies than having a bunch of startups do.
Got it. So, in a way, you're saying it's important to have just having those names, like that'll get your foot in the door in a way.
If that's what your goal is. If you're the type of person that's like, you know what, I can thrive on 80,000 a year. I don't really care about the big money. And I just really love working for startups, then stay there. The most important thing is just to be informed about what brings you engagement. But if you're the type that's like, you know what, I've struggled at startups for 20 years, I'm sick of it, I want to work for a large company and make a lot of money, then what you should start doing is move to companies that have higher and higher brand name household familiarity. Like if there's what we have is the top 50, which where if we ask anyone what's the top 50 names that come into your mind, if we just said to name 50, most people can get up to about 30, and it's all the same. Those companies, when they're on resumes on LinkedIn, have a much higher chance of success of getting to it because there's this brand familiarity that we have that company is successful. So obviously the FANGs, car companies, Nike, Reebok, the CPG, the Johnson & Johnson, Electronic Arts, Spotify, Uber, Twitter, like all of those types of company brand names will always perform better because people have an automatic bias to them because they're familiar with it.
Thank you for saying that. That's all I wanted to hear.
I got you.
I feel like most recruiters or HR people will never admit this. They'll say,
Oh,
"Could we
what?
actually
No,
get
yeah.
it from your
We're all bound by our internal psychology. That's why I tell people on their resume, if you don't work for a household name, to write in italics what the company does to give the reader context. Because if like my resume says Spotify, no one needs to know what Spotify is. But I spent 3 years working for a small med device company that had no household name. So I put on my resume, this is what this company does.
Got it. Okay, so let's say I'm interviewing for a role that's paying 140 to 180K, and I would like them to pay me a little bit above that.
Mhm.
Is there a possibility I can reach above 180K? Is there a way to do it, or should I not even be having this conversation early on?
It's always fine to have the conversation early on. You don't want to be surprised when it comes to money. It depends because certain companies, when they give a range, they may just be giving like 0.8 to 0.9. So that 140 to 180 could be 0.8 to 0.9 of the comp ratio, in which case, yes, you potentially could negotiate above 180, provided that you have a really strong business case to do so. If they give 140 to 180 and that's 0.8 to 1, then it's not really likely because it's very, very rare to bring in someone above the mastery point because of how much displacement it is. If 180 is like 1.2 and they just gave that so that you had some sort of overall range to work with, there's no way you're getting near that.
Got it. When you say business case, can you give a few examples of compelling business cases that have helped candidates you work with reach above the range?
Absolutely. So the most important thing is to realize that from the company side, your salary is a business cost. And what we have to do is measure internal equity versus you when you come in as a candidate. So what I always tell people is never use words like I want or I was hoping to get or according to my market research or this is what so I heard someone else got paid. None of that matters. What matters is what your value to the company is, and you have to essentially reinforce that. So the best cases that I've always approved, because I'm the one that negotiates like the much higher ones, because I'm the one that sort of protects the compensation equity. Cases like the reason that I feel I deserve 180 versus 160 is I've helped launch XYZ product, which is exactly the sort of situation that you have. I've done a lot of consumer testing for it as referenced against my interview. So if that is given, that makes me far more confident to approve an exception that may potentially displace others.
Got it. So can you talk a bit about displacing others and compensation equity? Because you mentioned that a few times, and
Sure.
we, from our standpoint, it's kind of an abstract concept. Like we don't have to worry about that. It's not our problem,
Right.
even though
No, you
we're bound
don't.
by it.
No. Yeah, you're. So what I always find funny is that people don't care about internal compensation as a candidate, but you sure as hell care when you're an employee and we're about to make the next offer. That's when all of a sudden everyone cares. But the concept of equity is that everyone is paid consistently. So it doesn't mean that everyone is paid the same, but it means that there's some sort of consistent science to it. And a lot of people think that means everyone is underpaid. And so that means that new hires underpaid. It generally doesn't. So it just means that most people within this new role, and that new role could be within the team, people of similar levels, people of similar team sizes, people of similar dynamic experiences, are all paid within a certain manageable range that makes a little bit sense of science based on responsibility, impact, scope, and experience. So internal equity means that, let's say we have a team of 10 product designers who all make between 140 to 180. Let's say it's even tighter and almost everyone is between 160 to 175. If you come in and say, I need 185, you're displacing everyone. And you have a higher chance of that being approved, provided there's a strong business case to do so. If you have 10 years more experience than the most senior person, and you have even like more experience launching billion-dollar products, and that builds a solid business case for us to displace that equity. If we can't get any more of a business case and you just seem to be right along the middle, it does not make sense for us to bring it 185 and displace everyone else. And that's just looking at things blank. Now, when we add things like gender pay gaps, ethnicity pay gap, nationality pay gaps, like there's all of that to look to make sure that we're being as fair as possible.
What happens when you do upset the balance? Is there some kind of ramification besides to say that you upset the balance?
So I actually like upsetting the balance sometimes, because that means I give everyone a salary raise. So if someone comes in and, let's say, so I had an example that was a little similar to that, where they were going to make 20% more than everyone else. I was able to build such a strong case for an exception that we had to raise everyone else's salary because there was so much displacement. And I had already set the stage for this like a month before we made the offer, of saying, if we go forward with this person, I understand, they're this wonderful golden boy, they've done all this, but the salary that we're looking at this is going to displace at least 4 people. 4 of those people fit marginalized communities that we have checkboxes for, that we want to make sure are not displaced. So if we do this, then we're going to need to ask for $100,000 as emergency funds to bring up everyone else. And we're actually able to do it with $130,000. So I didn't mind it, but I don't think a lot of people probably think as aggressively as I did.
What happens if you didn't do that? You didn't bring up everybody else. You just had wacky numbers all over the place.
So likely what would have happened, and this is what I'd said to sort of scare them, is people would have talked. And everyone would have said, why is this white guy who has 2 years less experience than me making $25,000 more? At which case, then what you could potentially do is some sort of mitigation as it relates to saying, okay, during the next compensation cycle, we have to put everything together, or sort of just kind of coast by it and see what happens. But it's sort of that coasting, ignoring, that then leads to like that really toxic negativity that a team has of brewing all of the, okay, well, I'm undercompensated, and then everyone starts sending spreadsheets around and everyone starts talking about how much they make. And essentially it's in a company's best interest to not have that happen, because no one's focusing on work.
Got it. Are there any legal ramifications?
Oh, sure. So this could be a violation of the EOC or the FLSA. So especially if there's any, if it's any kind of a trigger of someone being part of an identified group, they have a much stronger case of discrimination for compensation.
Got it. Okay.
And
cool.
Ricardo, we wouldn't move the person to the next band because there were only 3 levels in that band. Or sorry, 3 bands within that job family.
Erica Flowers doesn't really have a question, but it kind of turned into a question in a way. I just really feel like there's a dead end to design careers where you cannot be hired because you're too experienced as an IC but aren't quite management material. I wonder, what does someone like me do where I'm not interested in being IC but aren't experienced to be in management roles? I want to give a bit more color to that, because Erica and I are familiar with each other, and I definitely do see this across the board in the design field, where there aren't that many super high IC levels. You kind of stop around lead for most companies, and there are fewer companies with staff and very, very few companies with principal or any levels above that. So you basically get stuck as an IC at a certain level and you're forced into management. Are there any alternatives when it comes to this, or is this kind of outside of your wheelhouse as an HR business partner?
Everything is in my wheelhouse. I have main character energy, Hang. You know this.
Okay.
So I have fought very hard at companies where I've worked, like Electronic Arts, Spotify, and Epic, to make sure that we build an individual contributor path that's not 3 levels of IC and then to management. Because 1, no one should feel they have to go to management to continue to grow, and 2, not everyone is cut out for it. So there are a lot of companies that have built a much more sophisticated individual contributor path. But it becomes harder and harder to build a consistent job family matrix, and you find yourself doing it more for 1 or 2 people, which we generally want to avoid. So it's a very common issue. What I usually recommend people doing is to start thinking about consulting, and not just consulting as in open up your own business, but think of more consultative experiences. So like in 2021 to 2023, ed tech became huge. Everyone was like talking about Masterclass and Udemy and the 5 or 6 other classes. And if you can say, I have 20 years of product design, I can be a product design expert on content to teach other product designers. I think that that's one of the most unexplored areas. And I've seen so many people be successful as a ways to go.
Got it. Got it. I'm gonna shift things a little bit because we just have so many questions.
Oh my.
So there are many aspects to an offer, right? You have base pay, sign-on bonus, yearly bonus, and stocks, and all sorts of different kind of equity
We hope,
involved.
yeah.
Is there a way that people should be thinking about this? Because it can be very confusing, right? Like companies might give you different options, or maybe they don't. Maybe they just say, here's an offer, and it's up to you to ask for more. What should you be targeting, and how should you be thinking about each element relative to each other?
Oh, that's such a great question. I would say sign-on bonuses. Sign-on bonuses are kind of rare. I don't want to go too much into it, but usually you can't really touch too much on that. Performance bonuses you can never touch because that's always attached to a percentage that's already pre-calculated against your job level. Equity you can try to play with a little bit, but we usually have a really strict range, and it's normally like mid, medium, high, and it's so it's like one of those 3 numbers, and you have to come up with a really strong business case. So I usually recommend trying to push as much as possible in base, because base has so many calculations that positively impact you. So like I did one of my TikTok videos, like I showed how someone had like 150 base and a 160 base, but the 150 base had more equity and bonus. But over 3 years, the person with the 150 base was doing, the 160 base was doing much more because their further increases and their bonus percentages were calculated against a higher number.
Got it. Is there like an internal calculator for companies as they try to shift the money around between each of these elements, or is it kind of separate?
No, we use them all together. We use like Spotify was pretty. I know Meta actually has a really, really advanced system I got to play with once, but like Spotify had several different types of spreadsheets where we would view everything together. Versus, we would look at the 3 elements, and then we would look at what we call total compensation, and then we would potentially even look at total rewards, which is where you then start to marry the cash elements of your offer with all the benefits and perks and offerings and whatnot, so that people had a much rounder number to sort of look at.
Got it. But is there a calculator that says if I can trade off part of my base salary for say for like equity or something else, or is it just totally
Not that
unrelated?
I'm comfortable with, and I would be wary of anything that's out in the public because they're just going to look to sell you some sort of service.
Got it. Got it. Okay, so base pay seems to be the thing that people should be targeting the most.
Base, and I would say equity, because equity is kind of like free money. Like you just get it just by vesting there.
I see. Is there a method where you negotiate for your compensation? Like, do you have some kind of tried and true method for let's talk about this first, and next, and next?
No, I say to do it all at the same time, and I have not in my Dan from HR website store, but my Stan link. I decided to take the salary negotiation chapter, and I'm selling it as an individual, but I'm also selling it for free. If you want to just put in, I've attached a 0% coupon if you just want to take it for free. And it's like 25 pages of everything you ever need to know about compensation, how it all comes from the inside, exact scripts, all the questions that you should ask, how you should ask it, what the company's thinking along the way, just so that you feel so much more confident getting into it.
Got it.
But it's not that website. Just to make things
It's not that website.
No, it's the other website that I have. I know it's a pain in the ass.
Got it. Okay, but we'll put that in the link after this call.
Yes.
We're actually all done with questions. I know the StreamYard integration with LinkedIn is a little bit slow, so if you have any questions in the last like 2 minutes, we won't be able to see it for another minute or two. But definitely getting your questions now. We only have about 4 minutes left. We have still almost 400 viewers, 396 viewers.
Oh my God.
People are really interested. There's one thing that I read in your book that was really, really interesting, and I thought this line was brilliant. It says compensation is so complex because it is both a business cost for one side and a very personal element on the other.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about that? Because I think oftentimes we get so lost in the numbers that we forget the other side.
So what I thought was such a great aha moment for me was, and I think I included that even in the book, is that we had negotiated a product person had negotiated really, really hard. We went like 35% above where we were going to offer. We had hit all the right levers, and he was happy. Everyone was happy, and we were like, oh, okay. And he was so excited. He came like to my office once a month to say, I'm so excited. I thank you for doing all that work. And then he talked to someone, and she shared that she made 20% more than he did. And all of a sudden he was really upset. And I was like, the fact that you now know this information, like you were so excited yesterday, but now you are upset. And the thing that was upsetting is that one, she didn't make 20% more. She technically made like 14% more, but she was also in a different job family and a different job level. She had 2 years more experience. So there was nothing of concern for me on why she was paid differently, but that was now everything to him. And that was kind of like really reinforced this element to me that to this company, it was just a business expense. It was just, okay, this is how much we think you're going to do. But now to you, your identity is part of that. And that's just beyond, the fears of day-to-day life versus now I feel I'm less because this other person makes more.
Got it. One thing, and this is all very anecdotal, but it felt like back during the hiring sprees of 2021 or 2022, it felt like as a designer, you can easily get a 15 to 30% pay bump just by
Oh, yeah.
switching jobs. And at the same time, you kind of notice that the companies hadn't really updated their pay bands. Like
Right.
for senior level or level 6 or 7, it's still the same amount. Does that mean that designers or anyone in tech at the time was being over level at a point?
No, I think I saw. So I saw a lot of offers that were being more offered at the 0.95 to 100 versus 0.85 to zero point 0.9. But what we saw and why there's so much negativity now is that you had a lot of the biggest companies that paid the best were being very vocal about them. And then people who got them then decided that they were experts and would start making TikTok saying, oh, here's how to become a negotiation coach. I negotiated an extra 50,000 for my job at Microsoft. When they really didn't do anything, the company was just sort of responding to the market. So then when you hear that that's how much you make, that's how much you think every company does. But that's like the top 1% of pairs. So then you have all these other companies that are like, okay, we'll pay you, 85,000. You're like, well, you're lowballing me. And it's like, well, no, that's just how much the company has decided to pay in the same comp ratio. They just don't have the billions of dollars of revenue.
How do you recommend people think about this in a healthy way? Because as candidates, we tend to, you're right, in your book, you mentioned that we kind of make this our identity, and there's a very emotional aspect to this. So oftentimes we're seeing it as this person's making more than I am, or I might be taking a pay cut after being laid off, and it's affecting my mental health or my sense of self worth. How should I be looking at it in a healthy way while protecting my self interest?
I think it's such a great question, and I'm such a big believer of mental health and separation. Think of companies the same way that companies think of you. You are a resource; they are a resource to you. You are not beholden to them. You are not. Your identity is not based on them. What I usually tell people, especially when they work at Fang and they have that elitism, like that's great that you got a job offer at a company that is notoriously difficult, but that does not make you a better engineer. It doesn't make you a better product designer. It doesn't make you a better product person. You may have better exposure, but the fact that you work for these companies do not make you a better person. And so what I tell people, especially when they're like, by taking this role, it's a pay cut. I'm like, and I know that hurts. However, is that pay cut temporarily worth it to make sure that you feel restable for your finances? That you now are really conscientious of the sort of salary that you do want, and it is much easier to get a job when you have one, and you're not stressing out month to month for that. And what I usually tell people all the time is that a company salary to you is not a measure of how much of your value as a person. It's how much they think your contribution is going to be worth to a company. And the one thing I always have to tell people all the time is companies, not all roles are created equal. A program manager and a finance manager that are the same level of the finance manager is going to be valued more, is going to be paid more, because that's the contribution they have is worth more than what a program manager is going to bring.
Got it. Thank you for that.
Yeah, of course.
This is a great question from Ricardo. If you have time for it, I would love to hear advice on how people like me, typically a UX manager or head of UX, can enable HR to do their jobs right. So we have a fair compensation for all design roles in an organization.
So I would say at a first pass, that sounds a little arrogant that you don't think HR people are doing that, know how to do this right. So it would be like me, who's very familiar with writing job families for UX design, to go then to a head of UX and say, you're not doing your job right because I have this access to this job family data. And that could be very real for me because that's what I have access to, but you live this day to day. So you have far more information than I do. So what I would rather you see is have an open conversation. Now, it could be you have very low level compensation people who don't feel empowered to do it, but don't go in thinking you're right. Go in with your data and ask questions.
Got it. Thank you. I know we're a little bit over time. Do you have a few more minutes to
Of
chat?
course. This is the
Okay.
highlight of my day.
Wonderful. All right. I'm glad to hear that. So you are an expert in this area, and people can definitely use your help when it comes to negotiating their next salary, or if they want to figure out how they can position themselves in their career over time so they can be making more money and be more fulfilled overall. What kind of services do you offer? How can people reach out to you? How do you work with them beyond having books that they can read?
Sure. So my whole thought process is I hate taking money from people. I would much rather take money from companies. And so all of these, like, first thing, never, ever, ever hire a salary negotiation coach. They have the worst, most scammy model for pricing. In many cases, they will charge you a percentage of the delta between the first offer and the final offer. So they'll be like, okay, if you hire me, I'll give you a script, but I want 5% of that delta. So if the company gave you $20,000, like, that's how much you owe them, 5% of that. And the company is already expecting it. They're not giving you anything. So never, ever, ever hire a salary negotiation coach. My whole
God
thought
damn,
process,
I contracted with one of them.
really? Oh, yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's really dumb. Don't do that. Great way to lose
Okay.
money, and great way for them to just get money for doing absolutely nothing other than giving like a ChatGPT script. So what I really try to do is make as much content as free as possible. So I post tons of free videos. I have compensation playlists on my YouTube, on my TikTok, my Instagram, so that everything that I said and everything that's in the book can be found through the videos. But if you really want more information, I have the salary negotiation chapter pulled out. I've also, it's like $29, but I also have a coupon in it if you want to buy it for free. And then I have the overall compensation guide, which as of right now has 83 purchases and 83 5 stars and 83 comments of saying this has blown my world. If you do want to hire me specifically, I'm going to try to talk you out of hiring me. But the one service I do offer is a market analysis, because what I'll do is all that insider information that I have access to, I can run reports for an hour or two to give you like a good salary range for you, as well as potential types of industries that place a higher value of that role, as well as just overall placement of where you are in range against what we would call intermarket territories.
Got it. Sounds amazing. And I know there are a lot of resume writers out there on LinkedIn. How do you tell if somebody's legit
I
and
hate
worth
all of
your
them.
money?
I got into a fight with one of the biggest ones on LinkedIn this week after I fixed her 50th fucking terrible resume. I would never, ever trust a resume writing company, because in many cases you're getting resume farms. They hire people from Venezuela, from the Philippines. They give them 3 hours of YouTube videos and say, write this. They pay them $10 an hour. They keep $150 of it. And you get a basic, boring ChatGPT resume. If you want to hire a resume writer, try to hire a person and make sure that you validate that person has spent significant time in recruiting, HR, or as a hiring manager for that role in similar types of industries and companies. So every once in a while I will do resume writing, but I always validate it first. I will only do corporate positions. I have like no idea how to write like a legal resume or an education resume for college professors or doctors. So I'll always turn those away. But that's the sort of confidence you should have.
I see. Who would you recommend if you're talking to a designer who needs help with their resumes? Because, we might be okay at doing portfolios and stuff, but resumes are always like the last things that we put any time or effort on.
So I would do someone like me who has access into the corporate job families, and this is not me trying to sell my business. Please do not ask me to do your resume. So people like me who are individuals who have that same experience. So I'd recommend like Farah Shargi, potentially Mike Pedito. Those are like two other TikTok content creators who are also my co-hosts of a podcast. And I know both of them are familiar enough with these sort of job families for user design that they would make good resumes. I would also potentially reach out to Tom, who I know is a big influencer, and ask if he has any UX resume writers specifically, because he'll probably have a better Rolodex than I do.
Are you talking about Tommy Gioco?
Yes.
All right. Plug for Tommy right there.
I remember I was in a live with him once and someone had asked that, and he was able to provide like 3 different people. And I was like, okay, good, perfect. Like because he's really immersed in this.
Awesome. Cool. So we're definitely way over time at this point. Is there any last thing that you want to impart on everyone here? Any really good advice or things people should think about to change their minds about something?
I would say the best thing is to, if you don't follow me, potentially follow me, where I give a lot of this content. I answer a lot of these questions. I also got my first account of TikTok that was almost 200,000 followers got banned because I called out a racist for being racist. So I have my new one now, which is almost at 15,000, which sucks. But the biggest thing that I try to really reinforce is to remove the stigma of this. It's very easy to get tied up into the emotions of it, but where you see the most success is to view your salary as coldly as possible, and make targeted moves for you and yourself, change roles or change companies and whatnot, generally between every 2.5 to 4 years, and start making moves to larger companies because they usually have better pay scales as well as more mixed models. So moving away from just salary to salary, bonus, and stock is a great way over the course of 4 to 5 years to triple, quadruple your compensation.
Got it. Oh, one last question. Are there any companies that which companies pays the most?
It depends on what role.
For design, senior level designers, what
I would say
should
probably
they be targeting?
You're going to see I would say Fangs and Brandon Pharma.
Yeah. Brand and pharma.
Yeah, like some
Interesting.
brand CPG type of, like, in other words, big brand CPG companies.
Got it. Okay. Cool. This has been so informative. I've learned
Thank you.
so much. I hope everybody who's watching this has learned something today. And we can't wait to. I gotta read your book, man. I gotta
Get
get
on
into
it,
chapter
man.
one.
6 months after I promised you to send it for free, I'm like, wait a minute, I never did this.
Yeah, and then I said I was gonna read it, and I just never did. I'm the
It's okay.
worst.
You have a dog and a lot of poop in your life. I know.
I do. I do. I
No, but
wish
thank
he
you so
pooped
much for
go.
inviting me.
Thank you. You've been a phenomenal guest. I feel like you just so fast. You don't even to think about it. I bet you've been asked the same dumb questions like 50,000 times.
I would never call them dumb because this is stuff like it would be the same if we switched and I was asking you in-depth design questions. And you're so used to it because this is what you're immersed in. I would be fascinated to it because while I have a general overview, I don't have the same exposure you do. But this is what my role does. So HR is one of the worst reputations out in public because we don't know how to market ourselves, and everyone else has been able to control the narrative. Generally, pro-union people and really bad HR stories. But like this is actually what we do. Like while you guys are doing things for the business, we're focused on you. So like that's the only reason why it seems like I'm quick and whatnot. And none of these questions are done because none of this is public information. We don't teach this.
Thank you. I learned a
Thank you.
lot. All right, everyone. Have a wonderful Friday.
Thanks,
Have a great
everyone.
weekend. Take care. Bye.